This new board is starting differently. What you see here is no Honeycomb. Now I'm not building a plane or a space shuttle, I'm just giving a shot at a hollow board. The rest is pretty standard. PVC foam, carbon fiber, carbon Kevlar, some plastic and some build ply. That board is way more complex than usual, so the video will be split in two parts. This is the end of the first one. The second part will have all the carbon, Nomex, laser, Kevlar work. Like all my recent boards, this one started in Fusion 360. I'm not trying to make my model very accurate, I'm not using them for CNC. I just want to get the general shape, see what the volume is, and get an overall feel for the board. Once I'm happy, I export outline and rocker. I never did the same board twice, and I don't use my template for hot wire cutting. That's why I'm using that thick paper. It lays flat nicely, resists building a board, and is a very cheap option. The points I exported from Fusion to draw the curves are spaced 10 to 20 centimeters depending on the curvature. And then I use those two rulers with different stiffness to link them all. Same for the rocker, templates done. I make my EPS block from two smaller blocks. This is way easier to transport. As I use Gorilla Glue to assemble them, and the hot wire doesn't really like to cut through it, I have to be careful where are the boundaries. Taking into account how the sides will be angled, I can delimitate exactly where the glue should be and where there shouldn't be any glue. The glue is not really structural, and it will foam up when it cures, so no need to be really exact. I'm adding some water to activate it, and then hold both sides together with a rope and some wooden end plates to avoid digging into the foam too much. After a few hours, the glue is cured, and I can start marking the rocker on both sides. You always have the choice to start by cutting the rocker or the outline. I prefer to start with the rocker for a simple reason. When I make my templates, they are projection on flat planes, so they need to be drawn on a surface that is as flat as possible. If you start by the outline, drawing your rocker will be very difficult. And it's finally time to start cutting. For that first step, I use a small hot wire, V-shaped, to make a small groove outside my line. This will hold some tape that will be used as a guide to cut the full rocker. An adjustable power supply is great to use with hot wires. For this one, I know which voltage I need to get the right temperature on the hot wire. We'll come back later to build another one, and you'll see step by step how I design it and then decide the parameters. For the thread section, I find it easier to use two buttons set up with screws. This gives you a very straight line and is much faster than cutting grooves. As a general rule, I make sure my hot wires are not too hot. The warmer the wire, the more it will extend and the harder it will be to keep tension. This particular hot wire has a rope at the back that I can twist to add tension, but there's only so much it can absorb. So a slightly cooler wire will give you much cleaner lines. The deck on this board is entirely flat, so I'm using the button again to get a clean cut. Before drawing the outline, I give it a quick sand just to clean up the top and remove the lumps on the curved surfaces. But I make sure to stay outside the line, 1 or 2 mm is enough. You can always remove it later, but adding material down the line is not really an option. The deck is flat, so I can just put the template in place and trace around it. As the bottom is curved, the template will need to be shifted slightly in the curved part to make sure it's aligned with the top. That's why I'm taking some reference mark, squaring them to the side, and finally reporting them on the center line on the bottom. The whole back of the board on the bottom is flat. It has a very small angle with the deck, so I can use the template as is. Finally, when I get to the curved part, I shift the template slightly to be aligned with the marks and stretch it a little bit. With the outline marked on both sides, I can now get back to cutting. V-groove on both sides, tape, hot wire, you know the drill. The tape I'm using is a 3M blue pentose tape. As my hot wire is not too warm, it doesn't burn through if you keep it moving. To be safe, you can always add a second layer and you will have no problem. I really like cutting the outline out. As soon as you remove the extra foam, you start to see the board coming out of that block. Now that all the cutting is done, I can go back inside and start to draw up the shape. But first, a quick weight check. This EPS is 16 kg per cube meter, so that blank is around 120 liters. It's now time to draw up the outline. I do it in two steps. In the first one, I'm removing all the lumps and getting a smooth curve. And then I go around with a square, mark the eye areas, slightly sand, and double check to get my rails as square as possible. The tool I'm using is just a simple plank with 60 grit sandpaper stapled onto it. Now I made it 10 years ago, never changed the paper, so it's quite dull and perfect for that task. Now that the outline is fair, I can draw on the bottom shape. I made that partial template from Fusion based on the tail shape I wanted, and the rest is just regular surfboard construction with rail band to get smooth curves. As those rails are quite angled, there's a lot of material to remove. So I will be cutting the bulk of it with the hot wire. This time the wire is not flat on the tape, so I'm putting double layer just to be safe. For that board, I want the tail to be a very sharp V, angling up, but I'm not sure how much to remove. So I err on the side of caution and leave extra material. Realizing how clean the back was, I decided to freehand the front of the rails too. Turned out okay. Next, same as before. First, remove all the lumps, staying clear of the line, and then fare it with long continuous strokes. Now that the bevels are clean on both sides, I can extend the curve into the tail area, removing material slowly, keeping it fair, with the center line aligned with the board. Now that the bottom is close to its final shape, I can turn my attention to the deck. The rails on this side will have a much tighter radius to maximize deck space, so the rail bands I'm sanding here are much thinner and angled down. The shape is now almost final, only needing to blend all the curves together. Quick weight check, right at 100 liters. While the board still has a lot of straight edges, I take the opportunity to put a low light and use the shadows to check if it's really fair. To make the board more forgiving during touchdown, I slightly adjusted my plan and decided to round a little bit more the nose. All the lines I'm drawing now are more to be used as guide. I am not trying to get up to the line. I'm focusing instead to keep the curves as fair as possible, using the shadows to guide me. Now that I'm happy with the shape, I can start blending everything in, going over every single out edge to blend it on both sides. I'm still using the same tool, with very little pressure, slowly rolling around the edge to keep the line straight and fair. When I'm happy with the shape and all the rails are rounded, I switch to that foam pad with 120 grit paper. It's also very old and quite dull. Weight check, right below 100 liters. Perfect. Now that the blank is finished and I still have EPS to draw on, I'll mark the position of the foil box and the reinforcement plate. I start with the center of buoyancy. In this case, I got it from my 3D model. I can then place the middle of the track, 12 inch behind the center of buoyancy. I picked 12 inch for this board because from previous measurement I know that I need 11 inch between my preferred stance and the middle of the foil, considering the foil brand I'm using. In this case the board is very floaty, so I want a bit more volume at the front than at the back. Now, this is finally where I'm getting off the beaten path, hollowing out the middle of the board. The panel will be flat, so they cannot overlap the rail. The outside line is the extreme sides of the panel, and the inside line will be the shelf where the panel rests. The shape of the board makes drawing on the bottom a little bit more tricky. The back of the board has hard rails, so it's easy to use a ruler to set a consistent distance from the edge. But for the front part, with curved rails, I had to use tape to get a smooth, fair curve while making sure to stay on the flat part. Once happy, I set a few guide points to make sure my second tape would be symmetrical. With the tape as a guide, I can finally finish marking the cutout. With a very carefully and scientifically chosen object, I rounded all the corners. Square corners, never a good idea, as they act as stress riser. To hollow out the board, I will use the same technique. V-groove, tape, and hot wires inside. Of course, the groove needs to be reversed. The vertical side needs to be on the outside. I only made a mistake for it, 10 or 20 centimeters. As you might have guessed, my usual hot wire will not work in this case. You cannot access it from the outside, and it's a bit unwieldy. So it's a perfect excuse to make a new one. The goal is to have a wire that you can quickly disconnect, that keep good tension. The front side around the wire needs to be wide enough to be able to get some angle on the rails, long enough to go around the nose and the tail of the board. And finally, you want a hand switch, so you can install it while the wire is still cold, and then only turn it on when you're holding it in the right position. The wire I'm using is 20 gauge nichrome wire. It's always the same wire I'm using, so I know that 6 amps will give me the right temperature. After installing the tape on the blank, I can adjust the voltage and amperage to get the right temperature. Trying to follow a compound curve in a huge polystyrene block, when you cannot have your eyes on both sides at the same time, was much easier in my mind. It was nerve-wracking, but in the end I got it done. There was quite a bit of leftover, and a second pass helped to clean it up. And now, the moment of truth. 940 gram remove, pretty close to what the model predicted. What was not predicted is a rough surface, so after removing the tape, I get back my trusty tool out and start going, sneaking on the lines slowly. And again, I'm using the lines as guide. No need to hit the line as long as you're symmetrical. And no one will ever see the inside anyway. After 1 more hour sanding, let's see, 40 grams removed. The last feature missing for the EPS is the grooves where the panel will slot. But I'll cut those when the panel are ready, so that they fit perfectly. The first step of the panel will be the PVC foam plate with the tracks, and that's where the next episode of that build will start. But for now, I'll answer the most asked question: how far back am I track? 12 inch behind buoyancy center. Thank you for watching.